Hey, it's Will Duffield here. In this video, I want to share with you my thoughts on how you can get started buying your first investment property. So if you've never bought a property before, or you've never bought an investment property before, so maybe you've got your own home, but you're looking now to get into investing, how do you get started? It's that sometimes that analysis overwhelm, right? You're thinking all these different strategies, all these different things I can do. What is the best property strategy for me, and how do I get started? So to allow yourself to move forward in this journey of property investing, this wonderful journey of property investing, you need to understand that there's got to be a strategy. I think if you're looking at every single thing you can do, if you're looking at doing buy-to-lets, flips, HMOs, service accommodation, commercial property, rent to rent, new build, all this different stuff that you can do, and believe me, it all works. There's opportunity in every one of those strategies I mentioned. But if you're trying to do everything at once, what usually happens is nothing, zero, nada, because what you do is you get overwhelmed and you do nothing. So what's key is to start with something and become an expert in that one strategy, or maybe two strategies at most, and that's how I'd recommend you getting started. Don't try and learn everything about everything, but just ultimately move forward with something. So what should most people do? Now, there is loads of strategies, like I said there, that work. So any one of them is definitely worth pursuing. But in my experience, personally, if I put myself back years ago, starting out in property, and I put myself in the shoes of what most people struggle with getting started in property, was not having enough money. That's always the biggest problem. I just don't have enough money to buy enough properties. So what would I do starting out? And what would I recommend you do starting out your property journey? I would recommend that you buy a property, you do it up, and you sell it on for a profit. So what that means is you need to buy a property that's genuinely below market value. So not just any property, it's got to be not just below asking price either. It's got to be genuinely below market value. So ignore asking price. It could be set by a vendor who's optimistic. It can be set by an estate agent that's way too optimistic. Or it can be well priced, but you'll never know unless you determine the true value. And that takes time, it takes experience, but you'll get used to it the more you do it. But what you need to do is buy a property below market value. How much below market value? Now, generally speaking, it depends on how much work there is to do. So a property that needs absolutely everything done on a refurbishment that could cost you 50 grand is very different from a quick tidy up refurb that might cost you 10. So it's difficult to say exactly what you need in terms of below market value. But if you look at what is the refurbished market value and you work backwards, so you're working out realistically what your refurbished market value is, what you need to spend on the property, what your profit needs to be, and you arrive at your maximum offer. What you're looking to do is turn that property around in a fairly quick space or short space of time. So that is usually going to be properties that don't need free extensions and are going to take a year to do. More like properties that need a full refurbishment, new kitchens, new bathrooms, plastering, decorations, flooring, etc. But they might not necessarily need everything. Might need a rewire, might need some heating upgrades or new boiler, etc. But it's not necessarily going to be a big extension project and starting again. So those are the sort of flips that I look for. And the reason I do is because they're quick and I can turn the profit quite quickly. So I can buy the property, do the refurb, get them back on the market. And from me purchasing the property to selling it and getting cash in the bank, you're looking at typically around 6 or 7 months, because it does take time for your buyer to buy the property. It takes time for you to go through the process of the refurbishment, etc. So you're normally looking around 6 or 7 months, thereabouts, rather than years on end for big extension projects and that kind of thing. The reason I recommend flipping property so much is because when you look at the return on investment, and it's very high compared to other strategies. It's arguably the highest you can do return investment wise. So the amount or how hard money invested is working for you will surpass pretty much any other strategy you can do in most cases. That's important because if, like most people, you're getting into property and you just don't have enough money to buy enough properties, or you flip a few properties, you can build that capital quite quickly because of that high return investment, and because you are realizing the proceeds, you're realizing the profits of your project over the short term. Now, don't get me wrong, I love my buy-to-lets and I recommend buy-to-lets for long-term wealth generation and passive income generation. That's why I have them, that's why I keep buying them. But for most people starting out, when you do flips, you build up this big pot of capital that's your own, and it allows you to keep moving forward in your property journey without running out of money. But that being said, if you're starting out in property, you're probably still not going to have as much money as you want. So one of the best things to do early on is to actually raise capital. So if you've got cash to invest, absolutely use it. That's brilliant. But also start talking to people about what you're doing, because you might find, as I did in many cases, they have money there that's not working very hard for them in the bank, and they'd much rather invest it with you if you've got a good deal, because you can offer them a higher return on interest than they will get in the bank at the moment or any other time. So that is also important. Start raising that finance. So not only are you generating profits from flips to benefit you, but you're also raising capital to build your pot quicker by doing flips. And the reason flips work so well, because if you're looking to raise finance, you are flipping a property over the short term, which allows you to pay back your investor in full. Compared to some other strategies, you might leave a little bit of money in the deal. It might take longer to repay. Sometimes it's less attractive to investors. Whereas you're doing a flip, you're getting your profit, you're realizing that profit, and you are ultimately paying back your investors. There's no long-term debt. That's why if you want to raise capital like I did, starting out in property flips, back against the wall, I didn't have the money to buy flips, so I had to leverage other people's money, and it worked well for me. Back against the wall, had to do it. I either raised money from other people or I never got started in my journey. So if I can do it, you can too. So it's called raising private finance, and that's one thing that anybody can do, especially if you've got a great deal. The better the deal, the easier it is to raise the finance, because an investor can look at that deal and say, well, you're going to buy this thing at this price and you're going to sell it for this price, and there's all this margin and profit that you're expecting. Well, yeah, I'll go for that. So the better deal, or the better the deal, the easier it is to raise the finance. So starting out in your journey, do some flips, because it raises that pot. And then further along your journey, what you might decide then to do is to reinvest some of your profits into a more income-driven property strategy, such as buy-to-lets or HMOs, because you're leaving your money in a little bit. I mean, you're refinancing it once you've done the works on the property and trying to pull out some money, but ultimately you probably leave a little bit in most deals. And that's fine, because at that point, you've got your capital pot big enough that you can keep going. You're not going to run out of money, even if you leave money in your buy-to-lets. So starting with flips builds that pot, and keep doing them by all means, but also look at another income strategy that can complement the more active strategy, which is flips. So flips, of course, you're out there finding a deal, you get paid once, you get paid big, but you have to do it again and again and again. Whereas buy-to-lets, you can set them up, you get paid passive income through the rent every single month, and of course, you get capital gains because you're holding that property for the long term, which you're not doing with flips. Flips is a very short-term strategy, so there's no capital gains to be had. If you're doing it right, you're getting big profits, but you're getting on the short term. So flips and buy-to-lets go really well together, but flips are the best starting point for most people, because you simply don't have enough money in most cases to get started any other way. Now, depending how much pot you have, how much capital pot you have to get started, you'll probably need to use some form of short-term finance. So again, private finance is great, or bridging finance in order to get going, so you can actually fund that first deal. So if you want to get started, typically you're probably going to need somewhere in the region of 40, 50K. It doesn't have to be your money, but that's the minimum you'll probably need to get started. Depending where you are in the country, you might need a lot more than that. But as a minimum, you're kind of looking at that figure to get started. And you might need to leverage the rest from bridging finance, which is essentially just a short-term mortgage. Don't use mortgages for flips, because lenders don't want you to. They want to, mortgage lenders want long-term debt. They don't want to be lending on a short-term basis. So not worth doing, because you can find it more difficult to get a mortgage in the future if you use mortgages for short-term debt. So don't do it. Use bridging finance. Yes, it's more expensive, but it's the way to do flips, or private finance. So you're putting in your deposit. So that might be your 40, 50K, something in that figure or more, paying towards some of your refurbishment costs, and then leveraging the rest. So you can get started without having to buy everything purely cash. So that will allow you to get started in the property journey. Hopefully that information is useful. Realistically, if you do one good flip, and it's a well-executed flip in what I look for as a return investment, you are looking to make back a 20% return investment. So quite simply, average house prices in the UK, semi-detached properties at the minute, around 300 grand. Okay, so 20% on that, you're looking at a 60K profit. I personally, at that figure of investment, wouldn't be looking to make any less than that. So if you did a couple of decent flips next year, made 120 grand, would that change your life? Would that be something that would be interesting? And it's just 2 flips. It's not overly difficult once you know how, but it's a great starting point for most people. That's why I love flips so much. Hopefully this video is useful. If you've enjoyed it and you want to hear more videos like this, then go ahead, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and you will see me again in the next one.